So you're going to talk and discuss.
Okay, talk about the change.
Okay. This is what you had.
And then pick that.
That's so good. That's wonderful.
And there may be more cannabis money coming in.
Chair Williams and Supervisors, so this is where we left off. You have a hard copy in front of you, and this is where there was a majority of board members within the different thresholds for the ongoing then. There was not 3 votes for the ESI team project leader. For libraries, ongoing amount of $150,000. For the subpoena server, ongoing of $67,000, and for the DPO to supervise sex offenders, it was $120,400 for a total of $337,400. At this time, we'd ask your board if you want us to continue, if there's any more deliberation by your board.
Supervisor Hartman.
Thank you. I just want to go on record that I do support the probation and the subpoena server, so it's not important, but it is another vote. I am still seeking support for the $75,000, and I wonder if this might not work. We have $38,800 left. If we reduced the library 150 by $36,200 and then brought it, that would get the $75,000. Then we would, in one-time funding below the line for libraries, go up to $125,000. Could I get any support for that proposal?
I would definitely support it.
So it's the same amount of dollars. You're just adding the ESI team project leader position, reducing the ongoing library funding, and calling it one time.
Right.
Yeah, I can do that. So that will get us.
Bless you.
Okay. But you mentioned something about extraction earlier. No, I'm just kidding. So the Union Valley Parkway is going to have
I vote for Union Valley Parkway.
two off-ramps at Union Valley.
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Wolf.
Thank you. I just wanted to.
I just want to make sure first, he's still working on this.
He's trying to figure out what the new increase to libraries is. You probably have that number down in the.
I think it's 125.
Sorry, are you asking to add 36,200 to the one-time libraries piece? So it'd be 86,200?
Yes, I could do that, or I could make it even more if that would generate more support.
I think the issue is that it should add up to, between the two, it should either add up to 200 or it should add up to 230 between the two.
That's 200,000 between the two.
Great. That looks right. And Supervisor Hartman, were you done, or did you have another?
I'm done with this. I have one more plea to make, but I think
Sure.
Supervisor Wolf had.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that I added the 10,000, not that it makes any difference to the vote for the homeless piece. And just also took out the whole cannabis tax revenue. I just want to, I'm very disappointed about the library funding and how this board is going about doing this, because really, I understand the small library issue, and I understand that we want to have a committee come back and look at per capita. But the fact is that this is, I think it's blatantly unfair to some of the libraries. You know, you talk about the City Library of Goleta, but I think you're forgetting that there is a whole unincorporated area that is not getting any benefit from this county budget. And you have the library in 2 different places that's going to 5 libraries. So you're forgetting the unincorporated area of Goleta. You're forgetting the unincorporated area of Lompoc. You've got some of it covered in Santa Maria, presumably by including Guadalupe. But there is no county funding that's going to a whole class of people, a whole group of people. And that's only, my recommendation was only to get them back to where they are or where they were this year. It's not even giving anyone any more money. And so I just want to throw it out there that that there should at least be some allocation of per capita. I don't know that there's any. For me, there's no more money, but everyone seems to be able to find extra money. I'm the only one who wants to try and play fairly, in my opinion, to give it to everyone, and I can't get. And it's not just my district, it's other districts that aren't getting the benefit of this budget cycle. Then I also want to talk about the cannabis, which you're using. And yet there's no allocation there for what we heard from behavioral wellness and what we heard from probation. And I find it ironic that if you are going to look at this allocation of funds, that you're not even considering giving it to the 2 departments, and there's more, who will probably be most impacted by cannabis. And that was part of our discussions, as Supervisor Lavagnino said from the beginning, part of our discussions about cannabis, which would seem like we had every meeting. And yet there's not one penny that's actually going to fund the impact of cannabis in our community when we know that there's going to be a public health need. And I can only hope that these items will come to the board and the board members will decide that that is indeed important, because we know it is. We've heard it from a number of experts. And if you look down at the bottom, there's if you're going to believe that you're going to get all that cannabis tax, then put it where I believe it should be put. Otherwise, on a happy note, the good thing about this budget is that we had our budget workshop, and there are so many great additions to to the budget because of the budget workshop. I think CEO Miyasato and Mr. Frapwell did a great job listening to us. They listened to the department heads. There's a lot of new, I shouldn't say new, but there's a lot of reinstatement of positions. I can't recall what the first word was when you talked about the budget, Mona. Maybe it was stable, static, I can't remember. You know, for me, that's what's really important, is to leave this board in a stable position. And I think that was what we had presented to us in the budget book based on the workshop. You know, I said to Mr. Adam, maybe I should get his speech and read it. But I'm really feeling today that this is kind of a wish list. And I would love to add my little marker by each one of these things, because I think they're all important, but we don't know that we have the money. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Lavanino.
Thank you. You called on me right when I lost my place.
Well,
So I think it's
I can stall for a
B21.
second.
No, I got it. So the cannabis enforcement team, who's got that?
Yeah, put that slide up.
On B10, it shows that one of the cannabis enforcement is public health, and their title position is health educator, to the tune of $100,000.
I said behavioral wellness, and I said probation, and I do believe that public health will need more. But you're right, I remember that discussion. That, and we had it actually today. She said that that person would also do education.
Okay.
So I know that.
And I'm sure that after, you know, like you said, this is the first go-round, and when we see what comes in, I'm sure there's probably going to be every department lining up of the things that they'd like to do, and I'm confident that with a $100,000 health educator, they will get the message out in this county. I'm not sure I want to spend more than $100,000 right out the get-go. So, you know, I don't want people to get the impression that we aren't dealing with the public health aspect of it. There's also, in the licensing department of public health, environmental health specialists to the tune of $127,000. So public health is well represented. I do understand that probation and behavioral wellness, and I think there was a miscommunication between probation department that did not basically communicate effectively with the CEO, we'll put it that way.
And supervisors, through the chair, just to correct that, Chief Heitman did talk to me or communicate with me since that question was raised, and she's looking at doing some cannabis education that's required more than in one location. I think that was the issue, and I think she's just trying to be responsible as to making sure we have a solid program. So I think that is a worthy cause to look at, and we could continue to monitor that and see in the year, and I would personally come back and request more money if that's what they need.
Supervisor Adam.
And, you know, I just wanted to say that if it makes you feel any better, Janet, you know, no, I want you to feel better. Behavioral wellness and public health are not without funding, you know, already. And some of these problems are going to get caught up with the net that's already out there. And, you know, if you look at the Colorado experiment, they had a 9% increase in the amount of usage, I believe. And, you know, this is not going to result, if we have 9% increase in usage, I don't think it's going to result in a problem like this year that we're going to wind up having to deal with immediately. So I don't think that it's something that we're not already well prepared to handle.
Supervisor Hartman.
Yes, I had a couple of questions. The first is, if the cannabis tax fund money comes in as projected with our conservative assumptions, what happens when? And then what if more money comes in for cannabis, given that they were very conservative assumptions? Can you walk me through the process this next year?
Supervisor Hartman, to the chair. As with all revenues that we make predictions, to the extent they overperform, they typically will fall to a fund balance that rolls over into the following fiscal year. If your board wanted to give us specific direction on, in that situation, what to do with those funds, we're happy to take that. Your board could designate where you'd like that deposited. It doesn't create appropriation, though, even if you and council's here and can help us navigate the County Budget Act. And so that would be a possibility if your board chose to do that. Otherwise, it would fall to fund balance. We would essentially segregate it anyway into fund balance, and you'd have it available for your board to allocate the following fiscal year.
Mr. Chair and Supervisors, I absolutely agree. We, with the auditor, budget director, and I had worked through this in advance of that discussion to make sure we were on the same page as to where this money would cascade to, and you can designate a particular committed fund balance. Otherwise, it will default into the fund balance that the budget director was just discussing.
Supervisor Hartman.
So, back to my pet issue, which is the park bond and the master plan for parks that situates us to secure more funding. Is there, if we do have cannabis money coming in, is there any way that could be spent this next year for the park plan rather than just defaulting to the fund balance for the next year?
I think that's a great idea. I mean, this is an economic development effort, and I guess wonder whether there would be interest in funding that if the balance comes in higher than expected. Supervisor Wolf.
I just want to go back and remind everyone about the North County Jail. And I find it, I don't know how to, we're building this over $100 million building, and I know, we heard from Sheriff Brown the word Delta. I am over 100% certain that we are not going to have enough money. And I just implore my colleagues to be prudent with the money that we might be getting from from cannabis. It is, to me, it's just not this. It's not the savior for the county, and I just think this is the time for us to watch what we do, watch what we spend, and know that we have, aside from the North County Jail, all the other issues, the emerging issues that our staff brought up.
Supervisor Adam.
Well, I want to talk about this parks deal for a minute. This is going to be a bridge too far for me. So, you got me on for all of this stuff now, some of which I don't like. So I keep kicking the rattlesnake, and it's gonna run away.
It's part of the 18% infrastructure.
Okay.
I mean, those are some of your priorities, in other words.
Well, my priorities are maintaining what we have, not necessarily trying to populate the North County with trails, et cetera, and so forth.
Some of this money would be for Waller Park and better, it's water conservation, better irrigation systems.
Yeah,
I mean, this is to upgrade.
Yeah, okay. Well, we can discuss those on an ad hoc basis, but, for right here, right now, I'm getting to the end of my rope there.
Supervisor Lavnino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, unless somebody thinks they're going to change somebody else's mind up here, I think we pretty much beat on this.
Can I make one pitch?
Sure.
And it might be too far for you guys, but I think one of the issues, is that we're also talking about, and I don't want to leave the Parks Master Plan because I really think we should do that at some point, but one of the things that would be, I think, a little bit weird is to be putting, and it's understandable, it's putting money into a lot of money in strategic reserve in case we have another disaster, but then we don't fix the problem by which people who are notified with the WIA system that may not need to be evacuated then try to go to our website to see if they need to be evacuated, and our website crashes. And I know most of this was in my district, but next time it could be in any one of the districts, to have thousands of people unable to consult the county's website as to whether they're supposed to evacuate is pretty gnarly. And so I just wonder if there wouldn't be an interest, if not 500, but to allocate some figure to get that work started at some point in this fiscal year.
I'll tell you what, if you bring that back outside of the budget hearing and we see what cannabis revenues are, that would be a priority for me at that point, but I got to hear more about it, know what the technology is, and it's just not something that's up in my wheelhouse.
Fair enough. Mr. Adam?
Well, my thought was, let's see how much money comes in from the cannabis, and we can do that at the end of the year or some other time. I mean, if it comes in, great guns, and we're going to have more money than we thought we were going to have, great. We can, bring it back as a D item at that time and do it then.
Fair enough. Appreciate your guys' openness. Is there any other item that a board member wishes to speak about or make a last plea on? Then essentially what I would need.
Chair Williams, just a point of clarification. Because there is no third vote for the $1.4 million going into the cannabis fund at the bottom, I believe we need to reduce the one-time resource of 4.6 to be, so we have a balanced budget, reduce that by the 1.464.
Well, if there's no third vote for that,
well, I guess from,
unless we put it all back in strategic reserve.
well, I believe, so the question is whether it goes in the Measure T Cannabis Fund or whether it goes into, where?
Supervisors, I believe the auditor is pointing out, so we have an estimated of that available cannabis revenue, and if you're not going to be allocating the full amount, we would just reduce that total available amount by that amount. That's one way of doing it.
Well, I have 508 left, so why don't you put 508 down at the Measure T Cannabis Tax Fund, and so at least we get halfway to balance that way.
That's not going to get it done.
Well, it gets you a third to balance.
So the other 900 and change goes back into strategic reserve?
Fund balance. Supervisor Hartman.
I think this gets back to the earlier question I had about process and how we would allocate Measure T Cannabis Tax Fund. And I think what I heard is it could go back for next year's funding, or we could reconsider somewhere down the line this year for the 500, say, for the cloud-based internet or possibly other things. Am I correct in that?
Mr. Frappo.
Supervisors, really there's a couple ways. If right now, if you look at the column that's labeled amount, which is that which we have consensus on so far, you'll see in the remaining one time about $850,000. As our CEO mentioned, one option is to reduce your estimated cannabis tax revenue by that amount, or potentially increase your Measure T or the cannabis committed fund balance, the last line, to make up that difference. So if you wanted, it's your board's option, of course. That either one of those solutions gives us a balance.
Supervisor Lamey?
I like just lowering of what the anticipated revenue is, and then whatever it is excess at that point.
Works for me.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we still have a fund balance of the Measure T Cannabis Tax Fund, and my one condition is that we change it from Measure T to be the BUR Tax Fund.
The BOUR Bauer account.
Okay.
Chair Williams, just for, again, clarification on that line item, we already have a fund balance component set up in our financial statement, and it is simply called Prop 64-115 Cannabis, and so that would be the actual name of the fund balance account as opposed to a Measure T Cannabis Tax Fund.
I wasn't completely serious.
but I was.
And that's why you're the auditor.
Okay.
So does the auditor or our staff need to review these? Usually at this time, we would take a quick break to make sure all accounting. So Mr. Falati and Mr.
Paul,
Frappwell.
if you would roll up to the ongoing, are we balanced there? We are balanced there. Okay, yes, we would appreciate a short
I have
break.
a question, if you don't mind.
Supervisor Wolf.
Thank you. So did you just reduce what we expected for cannabis by $1 million? From 4.6 to 3.7?
Yes.
That's better. But
Okay,
that's over and above the 1.7, right?
Correct.
That's right. We're going to take a 5-minute break. Is that enough time for you guys to verify that?
About a 10-minute break.
10-minute break. So for clarification, the suggestion has been made so that it doesn't look like we are spending in the red, for me to take some stuff off my list here so that it doesn't look like we're spending in the, so I guess.
To Chair Williams and supervisors, you're right. So our staff felt uncomfortable doing that without your permission. So obviously you'd be adopting just what is in the first column, but given your preferences, we can, with your permission, we could reduce some of your
So can we just
requests.
start with striking the things that we don't have three
Correct.
votes on? From me and Joan, is that okay? Okay. That's right.
And then for supervisors, Adam and Lavanino, the bottom number, yes.
So
It's a bank of unicorns and rainbows.
The bank needs to change to 508, even though I wanted a little more in there, but. How does your brain work that fast, Steve? How does it work that fast? And if you just applied it to useful information, how brilliant would you be?
So supervisors, so we have your attachment E, and just to walk through it, so there's finality to it. On the ongoing funding, it's $75,000 for the ESI team project leader in CSD, $113,800 an ongoing funding for libraries. The intent is for the small libraries who are in deficit, but this is an ongoing amount. $67,000 for the subpoena server for the district attorney's office, and $120,400 for the probation, deputy probation officer for sex offenders, and that's your ongoing funding. On the one time, we've reduced the cannabis tax revenue expectation to $3.75 million. We had $10,000 in emerging issues fund balance for a total of $3.76 million in one-time sources. Of that, you've allocated 1.1 towards deferred maintenance to be divided by Public Works, General Services, and CSD, and I would recommend using the same formula we used for the 18%. The strategic reserve of $1.5 million, libraries $86,200. With the intent of $50,000 would be going towards CSD for a staff person to help us work on an appropriate funding formula, and the rest for the purposes mentioned above for the small library deficit. $10,000 for homeless tracking to improve our data systems, $155,800 for UVP, $180,000 for utility solar ordinance, $70,000 for P&D for short-term rental amendment, zone amendment, $150,000 for the clean energy roadmap, and putting $508,000 towards the committed account for Measure T revenues, for a total of $3.76 million in one-time funding. And if that is okay, we would ask for your approval of attachment E.
So if I could get a motion, it would be approval of attachment E and A through H as it appears on item 1 today. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Supervisor Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is voting on the final budget, which is my final budget, and I'm just going to make a couple comments again. I'm incredibly disappointed. And even though you've reduced the cannabis amount, and I know I sound like a broken record, $3,750,000. I think that if we wanted to have honesty in budgeting or integrity in budgeting, we could have taken, as I said at the very beginning, at least $3 million from litigation, program stabilization, and contingencies. There's so much money in this chart that we haven't even touched, and yet we are moving forward with an allocation of money that we don't even know that we have. So I don't know. I don't know how we got to this place, because I've never seen a process like this. I've never seen us with all of these potential uses that really may have been mentioned one time or two times by one or two board members, and yet there's a huge allocation of funds. On the bright side, I think that when this budget came to us during the workshop, I think that the fact that we didn't see any service level reductions, we didn't see staff cuts or significant staff cuts. In fact, we saw some enhancements. That was a good thing. But I almost wish that we could separate what we did today from the budget that was presented to us. So anyway, with that, I'm going to vote no on the budget. And just another final word is, I look forward to the library issue coming back to the Board of Supervisors so that we can have a full discussion, because now there's an allocation of ongoing funds to 5 small libraries, which I always thought was going to be a one-time expense, and it's not anymore. So we're going to need a lot of discussion about our libraries. And I really hope that we get a handle, and I'm going to be interested to see these next few months how the cannabis tax comes in. And hopefully you will all be right and I will be wrong. And, you know, usually I'm an optimist. And I voted for every budget because I'm an optimist. But today I'm pessimistic, and I'm really sorry that this is how it ended, because I'm just going to say one more time, we have so many issues in front of us. And I'm looking at the sheriff, and this jail is going to cost us a lot of money. And if we want it to work, we have to put the money in there. And right now, we've just, to me, we don't have the money, and it feels like a lot of fluff. And I apologize to my constituents and to the county as a whole, because I really feel like today we failed in being good stewards of your money, or lack of money. Thank you.
Well, I disagree. I feel that it is not easy to balance different needs in a fiscally limited time. You know, there's almost no difference between spending reserves and then putting cannabis money in reserves versus spending cannabis money and leaving reserves untouched. It would be tantamount to the same thing. But I think this is a good way to account for it, to show that there's an actual difference being made. And, you know, look, this is different needs. This is needs of economic development, needs of the environment, needs of our libraries, needs of our roads and infrastructure. No one's getting, you know, no one's running the table. Everyone here has gotten one of their priorities taken care of, and that's not easy to do. I think it's a fiscally prudent budget, but one that balances the very different needs that different parts of this county has. Supervisor Adam.
Well, I'm in a very strange position here, switching with Supervisor Wolf. You know, what did you say? Yeah, that you didn't.
We were all screw-ups.
No. I wanted to tell you that being the lone vote is not that bad. And you know what? You have always stood for your principles, and I think it's really healthy when somebody doesn't vote for a budget. I think it's a good thing that we don't all agree every time. You know, if everybody agrees all the time, I think it's less interesting for sure. And, you know, somebody not voting for a budget makes it interesting. That said, I'm glad to be on this side for once. You know, it's hard to not vote for the budget. And I think we should all give Supervisor Wolf a big pat on the back, and I'll give you a big hug when we get done. Because, you know, you're performing the function of, you know, this body deliberating the way we do, coming up with something that's just not everybody can agree on, and we fight over this stuff. That means it's better. You know, if we rolled in here and everybody just agreed, it wouldn't. I don't think it'd be as good. So anyway, intellectually, you know, I just have to vote for this. You know, there's been too much movement. Did you think it was going to be 3-2 or what? There's been too much movement in my direction here, and I gotta be intellectually honest and go with it. It's still not perfect. We still haven't funded adequately our maintenance because, you know, anytime we're going to continue to go down with our PCI and our FCIs, I think it's irresponsible. I still think it's irresponsible, but I'm going to vote for it anyway. I don't like pay raises being baked into the cake. You know, our negotiating position on those things is just horrible going forward when you bake it into the cake, because then everybody just thinks they're going to pick up their 3%. So what can we get besides the 3%? That's what the negotiation becomes. and you know, I don't think that's any way to negotiate. And you know, just in retrospect, you know, I've always supported the majority of the things that we've done. You know, I've done this voted against the budget each and every time, you know, largely for rhetorical purposes. And, you know, it's not that I don't support these things that we're doing, but I think it's important that we always think about what we're doing and not just accept it because there was a motion made. And that all said, you know, I could go back next year, so let's be responsible.
Supervisor Lavanino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I want to thank. You know, I'm always one to say if I'm wrong. So I was wrong today that this process worked out very well. Yeah, I didn't think we could do this in one day, but then I realized it's because you have streamlined this process to where it's so efficient, and we have the April workshops. Our BIFs are answered like board inquiry forms. I barely get done writing the thing, and I've got an answer back already. And so I just want to congratulate your staff, everybody that worked on the budget. You made it so that we can get through this efficiently in one day. And it helps that, you know, we didn't have any service level reductions or anything, and we weren't laying people off. That makes it a little more palatable to do in one day. But, and I also want to thank my colleagues, because I think this is our first real budget together. And, you know, I kind of disagree with what's been said, that I think this is, to me, felt like our best budget. More money was probably put away than at any other time that I've been on the board. Our strategic reserve is getting close to $30 million again. We restocked that. And I think we're being very prudent with the cannabis tax dollars that, you know, I think the estimate was somewhere, which I don't know why we paid a consultant to tell us it would be somewhere between 5 and 25 million. I could have, I think I might have been able to guess that. But, you know, obviously the money for enforcement is a no-brainer that we have to do right away, and to only put $3 million or $3.5 million into it, I don't think is you know, is asking too much. So I also agree with Peter that, you know, it is cool to have somebody disagree, because, you know, I watch a lot of the Santa Maria City Council, and for a long time, it's 5-0, 5-0, 5-0, 5-0, and it's boring, man. You know, it's just boring. So, you keep me on my toes, and but I do want to thank all the department heads. I think staff, everybody did such a great job, and I think we ended up with a great product. So,
Supervisor Hartman.
Thank you. Well, I'm just left in a position of echoing pretty much what everyone said. I think the department heads in preparing the budget, I think particularly Mr. Frapwell and all the behind-the-scenes work, bringing it to us, and our wonderful, amazing CEO, how much goes on just pulling all of this together and trying to reconcile these numbers and these positions. So I really appreciate that. I believe it's a very responsible budget. It's not like we're spending money up. We're socking money away. It's a very conservative budget, and I think that's the way to go. We've experienced a huge disaster, and we're trying to position ourselves in case we have other ramifications in the future. And I want to thank our chair, Williams, who took a risk on changing this process. I think the workshops, I think where we were at the workshops and where we are today in terms of how much money we had then and how much money we think we have now, and how much airing we did there, and how much really we were able to focus on just a few issues left over today. I think that was very productive. So I'm grateful to our chair for risking something new. So that's all I want to say.
So we have a motion and a second, but don't go anywhere because there is a second item on our agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The second item, please read it.
Our second matter to clean up here today is the recommendations regarding the fiscal year 2018-19 recommended budget for the County of Santa Barbara as successor agency to the former County of Santa Barbara Redevelopment Agency.
And do you have a slide, or is it pretty much there's no money there? So in summary, there's no money there. Can I get a motion to accept item 2, A and B?
move staff recommendation A and B.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. We'll have a vote here in a second, but I thought that it's appropriate, given that one among us now has gone through 12 of these cycles, and that's an accomplishment, both in terms of patience and everything else. So I think Supervisor Wolf deserves a round of applause for going through 12 of these things. That.
And I also, since we're giving me applause, it was me who started the workshops.
I did not. I think it's a great idea.
That's what makes these budget hearings so efficient. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
There is a motion.
I know.
There is a
There's
second.
gotta be a cartoon for that.
There is a motion. There is a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you so much. Thank you to staff for your hard work. We are adjourning to Tuesday, June 19th at the Joe Centeno Building in Santa Maria.